Hi everybody and welcome back to the live studio here for SQL in the City Streamed. Now I'm about to present to you my top 20 Toolbelt tips. So if you saw the last presentation, I apologise, but this is about me again. My name's Tom Austin and I'm a pre-sales engineer here at Redgate Software. And I've worked with Redgate SQL Server tools since 2008, working with hundreds of clients from across the globe, big ones, small ones, pretty much everything in between. And I specialise really in database lifecycle management tooling and helping people to get the best out of their development changes and moving them as efficiently as possible through to production. But today I wanted to take a step back from database lifecycle management because I know that you'll be hearing loads about that today and database DevOps and everything around that topic. And instead I wanted to focus on the Redgate SQL Toolbelt. Now the SQL Toolbelt is our most popular bundle. And one of my jobs as a pre-sales engineer is to go to our existing customers, many of which have Redgate SQL Toolbelts, and make sure that they're getting the most out of the tools within that bundle. And as you can see here on the slide, there's a whole bunch of tools, there's loads of tools. And I wanted to show you perhaps some of the features, the little bits of functionality that exist in the SQL Toolbelt, which you might not be as familiar with. So those features and functions that are just outside of those tools that you use perhaps every day. Often what we hear is that the tools have been in place a long time, new people join the team, they get given a license of the SQL Toolbelt, and their colleagues say, oh, you need this, this and this, and this does this and that does that. But actually there's so much more in there. And so hopefully today, throughout my top 20 tips, I'll be able to share with you some of those little more hidden features. So first up, tip number one, color code your databases. So again, I made reference to this in the previous presentation, but this is such an important one. It's such a great thing to do within SQL Server Management Studio, and it can save you loads and loads of times. So let's switch on over into SSMS and take a look at what I mean by this. So here you can see my query tab actually has this green color to it. And the reason that my query tab is green at the moment is because I'm targeting a development environment, SimpleTalk Dev Grant. But if I change this to something like SimpleTalk Production, you'll see my query tab changes color with it. So it turns to this red color. And the reason this is happening is because I've actually pre-configured SQL Prompt with my own preferred color settings. So you can see here on the screen, dependent on the server name or database name, we consider a particular database to be part of a particular environment, and those environments get their own dedicated color. So anything with _dev in the name is considered development, and it's a green tab. Anything with _production in the name is considered production, and therefore has a red tab. So this is a really, really easy way to give you that visual indication of exactly where you're about to execute your code and make you a little bit more aware about the impact of doing so. And talking of impact, that actually takes me on to my second tip, find your dependencies. And what we're really talking about here is doing some impact analysis. So before you make your change, make sure you've dug deep into the database structure and really thought about what's going to be affected by making this change to this particular object. And there's a component of the SQL Toolbelt that makes this really easy. So again, let's switch over into SSMS, and this time I'm going to right click on one of my databases and choose View Dependency Diagram. And what this will do is launch Redgate SQL Dependency Tracker tool, part of the Redgate SQL Toolbelt, and that will give you a visual representation of all of your database objects and the dependencies between them. So we can see the graph on the screen here at the moment. However, there's a few things that I can do to really focus in on the area of interest and make this a bit easier to work with. So firstly, personally, I prefer the hierarchic layout. So I'm going to change the layout style and the diagram will be rearranged for me. And then let's imagine that we want to make a change to our contacts table. So I'm going to type contacts in the search box, if I could spell, of course, contacts, and select that from the returned results. And you'll see over on the left-hand side, it now highlights that object on the diagram for me and also lists out the dependencies contacts is used by and uses these objects. But if I want to zoom in and really focus in on the area that I'm working on here, I can actually use the buttons on the toolbar at the top to choose the connected objects, invert that selection, and then remove everything else from the project. And if I reapply my layout, what we'll see is we have the contacts table in the middle here, and then all of those dependent objects around it. And there's a few more things I can do, so I can expand out these tables and see exactly what columns make up the tables, or I could right-click on an object and see the SQL script for it, so I know how these two things are actually interacting. So really, really quick and easy way to get right down deep within your database structure. Perhaps it's a database that you haven't worked on in a while. Very, very popular with contractors and consultants to get up to speed very quickly with the database structure. And a really nice tool that a lot of people aren't familiar with from the bundle that they've actually got. So let's switch back to the slides and see what tip number 3 is. Standardize your layout. So standardization is a huge thing. Every time I go and visit a customer, one of their objectives seems to be, we've got a massive development team and we want to try and standardize approaches to things. And one of the ways that you can standardize your approach is to standardize the layout of your code. It means that everybody who's writing your SQL Server database code has the same familiar look and feel to that code. So if they're working on an object that somebody else created, it looks and feels the same way as if somebody else had created it. But of course, there is 2 ways to look at this. If you're paying a SQL developer a whole bunch of money and they're used to working in a particular way, then how do you all of a sudden force them to lay out their code in a particular style and make sure that they put their commas here and not there? Well, instead of doing that, why not let tools do it for you? And the Redgate SQL Toolbelt, again, contains some functionality that makes this possible. So here, for example, if let's take a look at one of our stored procedures in this case. We were just looking at that get contact stored procedure in the diagram. If I open this out, we'll see that we have a select star in there. Let's get rid of select star first and foremost. And this is reasonably readable. It's quite pleasant to look at, but might not be the way that we've agreed to lay out our code. So let's take a look at SQL prompts options. And we have this whole section dedicated to styles. And what I can do within here is define a particular layout style. I can save that style, I can export it, and I can import other styles. So if I was a team lead, perhaps I might create the style that we're all working towards, export that to the rest of my team, and then everybody else on the team can import that style and start laying out their code in that same agreed format. Now, there's a whole bunch of different things that you can choose about how your code is laid out, but just for a simple example, let's imagine we want to place our commas at the beginning of a line. Slightly controversial, I know, but let's imagine that's what we want to do. So I'm going to change the option within SQL prompt, and then all I need to do to reformat my code is just choose Format SQL, or use the keystroke combination. And what you can see here is those commas are now all at the beginning of the line. It's adhered to that predefined style, and we've even got these little semicolons at the end of the statement because that was one of the options that I had set as well. So really, really easy to define a structure that you can pass across your team, and then everybody's code before they commit it to source control is going to look and feel the same way. But standardization doesn't have to stop there. It doesn't have to finish with just the way that you format your code. What about the way that you actually write your code? And what I mean here is when you're creating particular objects, why don't you standardize the way that you create those objects? And that's possible, again, with some similar functionality from within SQL prompt that we call snippets. So if I open up the snippet manager here, you'll see there's a whole bunch of predefined snippets that can be used with just a few keystrokes and expanded out to perform some particular task. So a great example of this is if I type CV and hit my completion key, this expands out to give me a template for creating a view. But I can actually embellish this with more functionality by adding some things like placeholders. So let's imagine that we were just looking at our get contacts procedure there. Let's imagine we want to standardize the way we create views that return values from a particular table. So maybe my views are all going to begin VW underscore and then the table name. So I can just pop in here, $ table name, $. In the body, I'm going to do a select star from, and then that table name again. So $ table name, $. And let's add a couple of extra ones here as well. So maybe we want to have a comment that tells us who created the object. So I'm just going to use $user, and maybe today's date as well. So let's do date, $date, So here we have a template that we've defined ourselves. We can highlight this code, right click, and then choose Create Snippet. And we can give this a shortcut, so I'm just going to use CV2 for simplicity. And what you'll see is that any placeholders that it isn't already aware of that aren't built in, it's actually picked up on those and listed them out at the bottom here. And if I wanted to, I could provide a default value for these. In this case, that's not what I need to do. It would be pretty silly to always create a view selecting from the same table. So I'm just going to leave that blank and then hit Save. And now whenever I want to create a view, I can type CV2, hit my completion key, and that will drop in the code. So you can see there we've got the username, we've got today's date. It's started with VW_table name, but I can replace this. So if I wanted to select from my blogs table, I just update it in one place, and then everywhere throughout the script where that placeholder is present gets updated at the same time. And I can execute this, and there's my new view. Created, ready to be used. So tip number 5. Tip number 5 is related to source control in your databases. And if I was to give you one tip, in fact, if I was to have 45 minutes to talk about one thing, it would be about source control in your database code. But I know, once again, that's already been spoken about today. So I just want to show you a couple of things that you might not know about how we work with Redgate SQL source control and the additional features that it can provide. So let's switch into Management Studio. We just created that object. How do we undo our changes? How do we undo the creation of that object? Now, in this case, it's not too difficult. We could just go and drop that particular object. But actually, when you're using SQL source control, you can undo any of your changes. If we right-click on the database and choose Other SQL source control tasks, we can open up our Undo Changes window, and this will list all of the changes that have been made since our last commit, and we can selectively choose to undo these if we wish to. So a really, really nice way of undoing any accidental mistakes that have crept in along the way. So tip number 6, find references quickly. Now this one, I guess, kind of relates to that impact analysis we did in point number 2, tip number 2. But this time, rather than working visually with a database structure, we're actually going to search within the structure itself for particular references. And that can be done using our SQL Search add-in for SQL Server Management Studio. So here, if I click the SQL Search button in the toolbar, it pops up the SQL Search window, and I'm very easily able to type the term that I'm searching for, so in this case contacts, and what it does is in real time it lists out all of the objects that make reference to that search term. So here we can see the contacts table itself. We've also got that add contact and get contact stored procedures that we saw earlier. We've got a couple of views here as well, and if I find the object that's of interest to me, then I can very easily double click on this and it will jump to it in the Object Explorer, allowing me to make any changes or drop the object or do whatever it is I need to do. But this is a fantastic way not only for finding references to columns or tables within your database structure, but also, finding things that shouldn't be there, references to things that don't exist anymore, or the dreaded select star from. If you want to find all instances of select star, then you can do this and get rid of them. So, tip number 7, don't write documentation ever. This is one of my personal favorites. I've lost count of the number of times where I've gone to visit large development teams, and one of the questions I always ask is, so who here is responsible for documentation? And usually what happens at that point is everybody kind of laughs and points at one another and says, oh, that's your job. No, it's your job. Oh, it's somebody's job. And it's just this thing that I guess everybody knows they should do, but very few people actually want to do it. And so why not use tools to actually carry out this arduous task for you? Again, within the Redgate SQL Toolbelt, there's a component that can help you with this. So this time I'm going to right click on my database and I'm going to choose Document. And this will launch the SQL Doc component. Now SQL Doc is able to very, very quickly produce a pretty reasonable database documentation set. So if I just choose generate documentation and then confirm with one more click, what we'll see is that this will actually go through, produce a pretty comprehensive document purely based upon the default settings. In this case, I've chosen PDF format, so it will open up here. And you can see this is a 257-page document. If I zoom out a little bit, we can whiz through some of this. So first of all, of course, we start with a table of contents, and then we'll go into things like server properties, database properties, before we get into the good stuff around, the tables and the objects that actually make up your databases. So let's take a look at one of these tables. I'll just scroll down another page or two. Okay, so here's our list of tables. Article descriptions is the first one on the list. If we go to the next page, this should begin the description and the documentation for this particular table. So you can see here all of the properties again, the columns, the keys, data types. Scroll down a bit further and we've got indexes, foreign keys. We can actually see the SQL script, and we can see that dependency information, so uses and used by at the bottom here as well. But this is just the default. There are so many things that you can configure and change and include and exclude as part of this process. You just use these checkboxes often within the UI of the tool, and you can save off this project. And why do I say don't ever create documentation? Well, actually, SQL Doc has a command line interface. So once you've created this project, you can then reference that in some form of automated build or scheduled task, so that your documentation is just created automatically for you as and when you want it to be. Fantastic. So switching back over. Tip number 8. Spot drift before someone else does. Now this is important. Drift can be a terrible thing. In fact, it's probably the most common reason I hear for failed deployments when I speak to developers and release managers and DBAs. And that's that, they produced an upgrade script, but actually the environment that they were deploying to wasn't in the state that they expected it to be in. And so therefore this script wasn't appropriate. So what you need is some mechanism of being able to determine when a database state has drifted from what it's expected to be, what's normal. And the component from the SQL Toolbelt that will take care of this for you is known as the DLM dashboard. So the DLM dashboard allows you to register various different database environments, and it keeps track of the state of those environments. So here we can see SQL in the City streamed. We've got a development database, testing, and production. If I were to do something to one of our SQL in the City stream databases, so maybe I create a new stored procedure called, say, hi, that says select, say, hi, SQL in the City. If I make a change to this database, the dashboard is going to recognize the fact that there's been a change to this database, and then it's going to alert me to the drift. So what we'll see in a moment here is that this will pick up on that change, and we'll have this exact same drift icon, this drift tag with this red information saying this database has drifted to an unrecognized state. And we can take a look in here and we can see what's changed. A stored procedure was created by this user. We've got information about when it happened, who the user was, how it was done using SSMS in this case. And we can say, okay, yep, this is an expected version, so I'm going to label this as SQL in the City v10 and acknowledge those changes. And the dashboard will go back to this green happy state. Now what's great is that if a change is recognized, if a change has been seen somewhere else before, so if we were to make this same change in our SQL in the City stream testing environment, then what the dashboard does is actually recognize that this is a version that's been pre-approved, that's been seen before, and instead of giving us that big red drift alert, it gives us this orange update alert. And even better, if you are using Redgate's DLM automation solution, then you can actually automatically publish schema information to the DLM dashboard so that when a new version arrives, it knows what its name is based upon the build number from your continuous integration system. So never be the last to know, always be the first to know. Let's take a look at our next tip. Never lose a query. Again, another great tip. Let's switch back into SSMS. If you're anything like me, you will have all of these windows appear, these query tabs appear throughout the working day, and I often forget exactly where I'm meant to be working. What am I meant to be doing at the minute? Where's the thing that I was working on 2 hours ago? I've opened 16 tabs since then, and I can't find the thing that I need to get back to. Well, that doesn't have to be a problem when you've got SQL prompt and tab history. So I can just hit the tab history button here, and then I can type a search term into this window, and it will search all of my open tabs for me. So here we can see I've got 2 tabs that reference contacts, an insert into and a alteration of the stored procedure where we moved those commas to the beginning of the line. But not only that, it'll also search previously closed tab for us as well. So I can look back over changes that I've made historically with queries that perhaps I haven't even saved, but are there in the history, in the memory of SQL prompt, ready for me to recall those. This is really, really useful as well if Management Studio crashes on you or you accidentally close it without saving something, because when next time you open it, all of these tabs that you were working on will repopulate and they'll be there and available for you to carry on where you left off. So yeah, tab history, really quick way of finding those lost query tabs that you were working on this morning before lunch and now you can't find and you're not really sure where to look. Just use the tab history feature. So halfway, tip number 10, and this is about quickly filling a table for testing. So sometimes as a development team or maybe as a tester, you want to populate a table with some test data so that you can try something out or so that you can see if a change that you've just made works as you expect it to. And that can be quite a tough thing to do. It can be quite difficult to get realistic looking data within those tables. But with the SQL Toolbelt, we include Redgate SQL Data Generator, which means that if I were to take a look at one of my tables, let's say the contacts table here, and hit generate data, populate contacts with data, this will launch Redgate SQL Data Generator. And this tool is great because what it does is it actually makes a best guess at the type of data you'd like to add to your database table. And the way it does this is by reading through the column names and the data types and trying to match them up with the many built-in generators that are available within the tool. So here, if we take a look, we can see that our contact ID is server assigned, so it's not going to generate anything for that. Our contact full name, it's guessed that we want people's full names. So here we've got a preview at the bottom here of the data that it's suggesting to inject into our table. Phone work, we've got telephone numbers. Phone mobile, again, we've got telephone numbers. Address information, dates, we've got everything here, email addresses, even photos. So I think these are actually the staff employee images of Redgate from circa 2009, maybe. So if you've met any of us at any of the conferences and trade shows that we attend, you might spot some of the familiar faces within there. But this is fantastic because without having to do any configuration, we've been able to produce a reasonably realistic set of data which we can now push into our tables ready to carry out some testing against. And we can even make choices around how much data we want to generate. So we could specify a numeric value. Here I'm suggesting 1,000 rows. Or we could do it by a proportion of another table. So maybe you have a customers and an orders table, and on average each customer makes 3 orders. So your orders table would be 300% the size of your customers table. Or you could use a generation time. So maybe if you want to pop off to grab a coffee and you want it to generate data for that time period, say 10 minutes, and then when you come back it would have stopped once it reached that 10-minute time period. So really very simple way of getting access to that testing data. Tip number 11, I guess I'm cheating a little bit here, but customize this generated data. Just because the tool suggests that this is the data that you want in there, doesn't mean to say that it's exactly the way you want it. And actually there's functionality within the tool that means you can tweak it just enough to get the right data into your test table. So let me show you how we might do this. If I go back into SQL Data Generator, one of the things I noticed here is that for the telephone numbers here, it's defaulted to US style telephone numbers, which is great a lot of the time, but I happen to be based in the UK, and UK telephone numbers don't follow this format. So if I wanted to adjust this, then I can simply select that column, and I'm just going to amend the regular expression at the top here. So UK mobile numbers begin 07, then we can have the numbers 0 to 9 3 times, maybe a space, and then the numbers 0 to 9 6 times. And what we're left with here is a telephone number format that's exactly the format I want to use. And you can it's still randomly created numbers based upon this format, but it matches my expectations. Another thing I noticed here was that the address columns haven't exactly matched up as I'd like them to. So address line 1 looks great, you know, a house number and a street name, but address line 2 and address line 3 need some work. So here I can actually choose from the rest of the available built-in generators to tweak this for exactly what I need. You've got personal information in here, you've got geographic information, shopping information, business information, so on and so forth. What I'm looking for in this case is maybe a US city, and then for address line 3, maybe a US state. So we'll just change that here. And all of a sudden we've got a data set that's much more aligned with what a real world data set would look like. And therefore we can do some testing with much greater realism and really notice the differences that we might see when there was a problem with any of our functional code. So one final thing to mention about these generators is there are generic generators as well. So rather than using these very specific ones, if you want to, you can use things like Python scripts, regular expressions as we saw, SQL statements, CSV files, plain text files, you know, whatever's appropriate for you to get the right source data into your test tables. So, tip number 12, run your queries once. Now this is probably the least familiar feature of the SQL Toolbelt, from my experience anyway of going around the teams. Loads and loads of people that I see are creating upgrade scripts using something like Redgate SQL Compare, and then they have a collection of maybe 5 to 10 target servers that they need to run these upgrade scripts on, which are all the same, so the same script can be used. And I see them taking this script, connecting, executing, connecting somewhere else, execute. Don't do that. Don't do that. Instead, use a tool that allows you to take one or many scripts and run them against one or many targets. And that's exactly what SQL Multiscript is. So back into our virtual machine, and here I'm just going to launch SQL Multiscript. And what you'll see is when SQL Multiscript launches, we have an area over on the right of the screen here which enables us to create a distribution list. So this is all of our database targets that we want to execute our code against. And in this case, I'll just wait for it to refresh the local server instance. We could have these across multiple servers if we wish to, but I'm just going to grab maybe SimpleTalk Production and our SQL in the City Streamed production database. So we've just got 2 in this case, but you can build up your lists with as many as you need. And also you can have multiple lists. So you can put things into categories and just have distribution lists dedicated for the particular tasks that you want to perform. Once I've created my list, over on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see I can either create new scripts or actually add existing ones. So if I've got scripts saved off to disk, I can import those. Or, like I'm going to do today, I can just type ad hoc code into my central window. So here, let's do that select star from contacts again. And when I hit execute, this is actually executing that code against both targets. So SimpleTalk Production and SQL in the City Stream Production. And you can see the aggregated results over here. But I can filter this, so I can turn off my simple talk collection of results if I'd like to and just see the SQL in the City streamed results, or I can have everything at once. So really configurable, really easy for you to set up exactly how you need your distribution lists, and then you never have to go through that pain of running the same thing over and over again against multiple targets. 13, you may have noticed earlier I do have a tendency to really dislike wildcards. I think they're great to begin with. I think it's a really useful way of starting off a query, but I don't like to see them. I think usually it's very bad practice for us to use select star. So instead, what we want to do is expand these out and be specific about the columns that we're returning from the tables that we're selecting from. And so with SQL prompt, if we switch into SQL Server Management Studio, if I do have a select star, so let's do something like select star from articles, I can simply place the cursor to the right of the star, hit my completion key, and that will expand that out so that I'm being very specific about the columns, and then I can remove the ones that I don't want. And this works as well if you have multiple wildcards throughout your script. So let's do 2 or 3 here. So we'll have select star from article descriptions and blog comments and so on and so forth. And actually, if we go up to the SQL prompt menu, we have this option to expand all wildcards, and that will expand all of them from throughout the entire script. So we can do them all in one go and then go back and tweak it as we need to. People often ask me, actually, what about if I don't, what about if I only want a couple of columns? It's great if I've got a 20-column table and I expand the wildcard, then I've got to go and delete all of the ones that I don't want. Well, actually, for that situation, I'd probably use the column picker. So once you've deleted the wildcard, if you hit Control Left, then you're actually able to go through and choose exactly which columns you want to drop in there. Hit your completion key and it will drop them in. So if it's just a few rather than most, then that's perhaps another approach that you can use. So next on the tip list, clean up your databases. Now, I don't mean that your database code is rubbish and terrible, but what I mean is that over time, often things get left behind. So there's objects in there that don't really need to be in there, but people look and they think, well, I don't really know what that does, but it might be important, so I'll leave it there. And then this continues and we end up with hundreds of stored procedures that don't really do anything. And the SQL Toolbelt has some functionality that allows you to search through your database objects to look for things like this. So let's imagine if I were to create a new table in our database. So it's just going to have a single column, very simple table, this one. And I'm going to call that my table. And then I'm going to create a new stored procedure, which selects from, I suppose it could be a view, but let's say get my table. And then I'm going to do the dreaded select star from my table. So we've got a table that has a column and we're doing a select from that in this stored procedure. Okay, great, fine. But then what about if I proceeded to drop my table? So this is no longer needed. I'm going to get rid of it. So I'll just delete that. Now the stored procedure is still existing there. It's it's fine and happy. SQL Server's happy with it. But it can't do anything because the table that it selects from doesn't exist anymore. Well, if we run SQL prompts option to find invalid objects, this will actually pick up on those objects which don't have valid references, along with other types of invalid objects as well. And actually we will report that back to us so that we can take the necessary actions that are needed to rectify the situation. So in this case, you can see that search is completed and it's returned the getMyTable object is invalid, and it's invalid because it references an object myTable, which doesn't exist. So I can just choose to either script this as an alter or script it as a drop. I'll get rid of it in this case, and we can deal with the situation. So customize your deployments. So I mentioned this briefly in the presentation that I gave with Steve earlier, but sometimes you want to be very specific about the way a particular change is handled. And so there is some functionality within Redgate SQL Source Control that allows you to add customized change scripts which are then reused when it comes to deployment, whether that be manually triggered by using SQL Compare or whether it is triggered as part of an automated deployment process using the database lifecycle management automation components. And so how do we get this to work? Well, let's imagine a change that we might want to be very cautious over. Let's say we want to rename our blogs table. So I'm going to use smart rename functionality, actually, so you get an added tip in here. Let's imagine we want to rename it blog posts. So we'll just do the smart rename. This will produce the script for us that takes care of all of the dependencies, and we can execute this and make those changes. Now, once we have done this, we can come to our commit window by right-clicking on the database and choosing commit changes to source control, and this will list out all of those changes for us. But one of the things that you'll notice is that actually in this case there is a warning triangle here, and if I try and commit this change, it's actually prompting me that some of the changes here might cause a deployment error or data loss. And in this case, the reason behind that is because it's not sure whether it's a drop of the blogs table and a create of the blogs post table, or a rename, as actually we want to do in this case. So it suggests that we should maybe use a migration script. So I can click add migration script. I get a choice of whether I want to start from a blank script or whether I want to replace my uncommitted schema changes. In this case, I can replace my uncommitted schema changes. I can click generate script, and this will give me the default that it would have produced for deployment purposes. And I can actually replace that with the actual script that I ran. So here I can just copy and paste this into my migration script window and then save and close this. And what this means is that now when I commit this to source control, this is actually going to associate that customized deployment script with this particular collection of changes. And so therefore when the automated deployment runs, or when SQL Compare does a deployment from the source control repository, it's going to pick up on that customized script and substitute that in for any dynamically produced code that we perhaps would have used otherwise. So, getting near the end now, script as insert. This one's fantastic for anybody who writes queries, gets a data set, and then you want to put that somewhere. You want to put it into a table somewhere, maybe temporarily or maybe permanently. And sometimes that can be quite a frustrating thing to try and achieve. But with SQL prompt, it doesn't have to be. Let's open up a new query window, and we'll do a select from one of our tables. We've been using contacts a lot today, so let's stick with that. And we have our data set here. So here's a collection of results that have been returned from our query, and we want to push this into somewhere, some table or some place. So we can actually select all of this and right-click on the data, and we have this option to script as insert. And this is pretty not secret, secret's the wrong word, but many of the people that I work with aren't aware that this feature exists. One, it is quite new, and two, it's not that common that people go around right-clicking on the results grid in SQL Server Management Studio. So what you can see is produced for us here is the insert into, and then we've got a temp table tag here, but it's also creating that table for us if we wish to as well. So if we want to create a new table, we can change this name, and then we can run this script and it will create that table and pass the data into it as well. 17, rename your alias. So actually this is a great time to show this, and based upon what we've done here. So if I did want to rename the table that we were putting this into, then I could actually right-click on it and choose rename alias or variable, and then give a new name to this table. So my table was the one I called it earlier. Very creative I am. And you'll see that it changes it throughout the entire script. And likewise, I have a habit of picking really bad aliases. So if I was going to do a select star from, excuse me 1 second, let's have a sip. So if I was going to do a select star from maybe our articles table A joined to our article prices table, AP on, and SQL prompt will of course suggest the join condition for me. Now that's fine, but actually if I look at the tables that I've got an article prices and I've got an article purchases. So AP isn't very good at defining exactly where I'm working. And so instead what I might want to do is rename one of these aliases. And I can do that very easily using SQL prompt. So all I need to do is highlight the alias that I wish to rename, this AP, right click, choose rename alias or variable, and then I can change this to art per or art pri, depending on which one I'm working with. And you'll see once again it changes it throughout the entire script for me. So, oh, little tickle there. Tip number 18, I think I'm back with you all, excuse me. Tip number 18, this is about switching between the tools. So many of our tools have a similar context behind them. So SQL Compare, if you have a source and a target that you're comparing with our SQL Compare tool, you might actually want to do the same comparison, but for the data as well. And not many people realize that within the tools there is a mechanism of switching between them. So here when I'm in SQL Data Generator, if I wanted to, I could click on this icon in the top left corner and I could choose one of the other tools to launch from this point. So SQL Data Compare, Dependency Tracker, Doc, so on and so forth. And exactly the same is true with any Redgate tool that you're in. You just simply click on that red icon in the corner and it will give you the options of where you can actually go to from here. Now, that's not to take away from the fact that for those of you who are used to working with our SQL Server Management Studio integration pack, that's quite a mouthful I know, but you can right click on the databases in the Object Explorer and you can choose this schema compare deploy, set this as the source, and you can drag and drop other databases from the Object Explorer and set those as the target. So maybe we want to do a comparison between our development environment here and perhaps our test environment, SimpleTalk testing, drag and drop this over here. And I can launch SQL Compare from here and it will have that source and target pre-configured for me. Now, if I go through and I do this comparison and the deployment, but then I accidentally close the tool, forgetting that I could have just hopped up here to the red icon in the corner, then do remember that actually within SSMS, you've got this switch at the top here as well. So you can switch between this schema comparison and the data comparison as you need to. So back to the slides. 19, follow best practices. So that's good advice in general, I guess, but I'm getting at something quite specific from within the SQL Toolbelt here. And the tool that I'm referring to is SQL Test. Now, SQL Test is a unit testing tool for your SQL Server databases based upon the T-SQL-T framework, but you can actually use it to do some best practice analysis, so static analysis. If I choose my SQL in the City Stream dev database and open SQL Test, I can then choose to add this database to SQL Test. And when I click Add Database, you'll see that we have this Add SQL Cop Static Analysis Tests. And if I do so, when the test framework has finished installing, it will have, as part of this project, a whole bunch of best practice tests, I guess, really. So here you can see all of these tests that have been created automatically for us. And so before you've even started writing your own unit tests, you've actually got some functionality straight out of the box. So an example here, stored procedures named SP underscore. If I run this test at the moment, everything passes. However, if I were to rename one of our stored procedures, let's take that say hi one that we created earlier, and I'll rename that SP underscore say hi. Then when I run the test again, you'll see I get the failure message. And I get this information over on the right-hand side, which tells me exactly which stored procedure has failed and why it's failed as well. And I can click the link here to go to some further information about why this perhaps might be considered bad practice. And you can build up these tests so that you've got your own unit tests and checks for things that you're concerned about, things that you're worried about, to make sure that your databases are in the format that you expect them to be in. So we're coming up to my final tip of the day: never forget a where clause. And this is one that I think I've spoken to maybe over 50 people who have told me how much this has saved them, and it's not actually been available in the product that long. But what it does is just gives you this little safety net, and it's not just around update statements, but there's a whole bunch of different things that SQL prompt will detect and warn you that you're about to do, which might not be the thing you want to do. So here, if I open a new query, and let's imagine I'm doing an update to our contacts table, and I want to move to our office in Pasadena, so I want to set my country code to US. But then all of a sudden I get distracted, or I'm not thinking it through, I'm just thinking about the sunny beaches, and I hit execute without adding my where clause to say that it's my record that needs updating. What I get is this little execution warning message that tells me you're about to execute an update statement without a where clause. Do I want to do that on all of the records, or actually, as I do in this case, don't want to execute it? So I can choose that option. So guys, we've reached the end of my top 20 tips. Thank you so much for staying with me all the way through that, particularly with the tickle in the throat there. Here's a couple of comments that I don't want to hear you guys being one of the people that says this. So many people I speak to say this, and I don't want to hear it from you. I didn't know we had that. I didn't know that was in the bundle. That's not something we want to hear. So guys, thank you all very much, and enjoy the rest of the sessions today.